welcome to this latest edition of our Brain Talks, a podcast series that is being organized under the Brain Innovation Days umbrella. As you may know, the Brain Innovation Days aim to bring together key opinion leaders and stakeholders from the ever-growing brain innovation ecosystem to discuss current issues, create synergies, and showcase the importance of brain innovation and how it is benefiting Europe and the world. In today's Brain Talk, we take a step back to our January Brain Innovation Days digital event, where we were pleased to welcome Dr. Padraic Ward, head at Roche Pharma International, who is with us again today for an extended one-on-one discussion. I will be your moderator for today, Frédéric Destrebec, the Executive Director of the European Brain Council, which is a founding partner of the Brain Innovation Days. Padraic, during our January event, from innovative ideas to creative brain interventions, where we were able to kickstart a discussion with you and Mark Ferguson, the chair of the European Innovation Council Advisory Board, around the topic of competitiveness in Europe in the innovation space. And despite no difference in opportunities at the onset, it was mentioned that research and innovation in healthcare in the EU has been falling behind compared to their US and Asian counterparts. And today we'd like to dig deeper into this discussion, exploring healthcare innovation in Europe and how Europe can actually keep its edge in healthcare and in neuroscience research and development. We will also touch a little on the subject of the April digital session that we just had, looking at the potential learnings from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and what the future can hold for health innovation. So let's get started. Padraic, the pandemic has been a shock to our societies, our economies, our healthcare systems around the globe. But that said, it has also shown how fast policymakers, industry, and I would say the biomedical research ecosystem can jointly collaborate and move together to fight a pandemic. How would you see the lessons learned and how would you see the future against what we just witnessed in the last 12 to 15 months?
Yeah, it's such a huge question. And first of all, thanks for inviting me to join you on the chat today. Look, we've seen the good and the bad over the last year or 18 months, I think. I'm a natural optimist, but I do hope we're getting towards we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel now. In terms of the good that we've seen, I would say the best is that we've gone from not even having ever heard of or being aware of a disease to having great diagnostic tools, vaccines, now medicines to treat it in a year. And when you stop and think about that, that's actually pretty remarkable that you would go from not having identified or characterized a disease to being able to have all sorts of treatment approaches to it. There's still lots to do, for sure, but that really is remarkable progress. In all of that, it has been great to see and to experience the way that different participants and stakeholders in the healthcare system have come together. I mean, it's become very obvious to us, something which probably should have been obvious before, and that is policymakers, regulators, industry, we all in the end have the same objective. And the same objective is providing, in this case, the citizens of the European Union with great healthcare outcomes. And we've been able to do it together very fast. Without cutting corners, too, I should say. Everybody has done what they need to do, brought their different perspectives, brought their different roles to bear, and to get things done really fast. And that also, I think, is, at some point in time, hopefully, we'll be able to look back at it and say, that was pretty remarkable, and to have participated and done that was great. Mm-hmm. The less good, I would say, I think at a high level, I think we have seen the consequences of being complacent about infectious disease. I think we haven't really given it the attention that it has deserved over the past many years. I think we have come to think that infectious disease was something of the past or something that's far away from Europe, and we clearly see that isn't the case. And maybe also the fragmentation of our healthcare systems. I think we have great healthcare systems in Europe, and I keep repeating that. I really think we do. On the other hand, the fragmentation of those and the systems sometimes gets in the way of helping us to do the things that are needed, and that's something we should address for the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, you summarized quite well. I mean, the success of biomedical research and of, let's say, the willingness, when there is a political will, there is a way, I would say, in terms of generating this health innovation. It was remarkable, but we feel that there were still hurdles to the way we can help science to deliver. Could you identify some, let's say, bottlenecks potentially? I mean, you mentioned fragmentation of healthcare systems, but would you see any other, I would say, along the way that we probably managed to lift, let's say, in the context of the crisis, but that for the future we may need to learn from, and to say that maybe, you know, we should continue to envisage lifting them as we go?
I think I still feel that we're in, at least from the work I do every day and the colleagues that I have here in Roche, we're still in the middle of it. I'm not sure we have enough distance to everything to be able to have a good, honest and clear-headed understanding of learnings. You know, beyond what I said about the fragmentation of systems, I think we do need a new discussion about how we think about healthcare. I think we have, or we had, come to see healthcare as being a cost, and I would argue that we need to see healthcare as an investment. You know, it's something that sure it has to be paid for at all its levels, but still we should think about. And we see now, you know, what happens when healthcare systems become under real strain, that economies end up closing, or people can't get on with their normal lives. I'm not saying that that's because of the fact that we have seen healthcare system as a cost. I think there's a very specific set of circumstances that we're facing now with COVID-19. But as a general rule, I think we had come to treat looking at what we spend on healthcare rather than thinking about what we invest. I know that's not a direct answer to the question you asked, Fred, but I think it's something we do need to talk about once things calm down a little bit, and then figure out, is there anything that mindset, that cost mindset as opposed to investment mindset, is stopping us doing? And if so, what could we do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can only agree with what you just said, that probably, let's say, thanks to the COVID-19, we have a new, let's say, focus on this importance, and the importance of healthcare being such a worthy investment for society. That's a point that EBC has been making for years, with economic studies on the need to, well, let's say, first on the economic cost of brain disorders, but also on the need to continue to invest into, let's say, the management of these conditions for the benefit of society. But coming back to this issue, I mean, you mentioned supporting investments, achieve better outcomes. Are there any other, I would say, issues surrounding this notion of access to innovation in your views, in terms of how our systems respond and our systems are capable to embed innovations being generated or made accessible to the public? There is probably an issue also, if we think longer term, on how we can sustain this approach and how this can be made possible in the long run.
Yeah, there's definitely a debate or a discussion to be had, and I say discussion rather than debate, because I think, you know, debate, at least for me, often brings the idea that we have competing ideas or conflicting ideas. I think there are different ideas that we can bring to bear, but if we do it with the spirit of wanting to help achieve better outcomes for more people, to do it faster, and to do it in a way that's sustainable for everybody, I think that's really important. And, you know, and I think that sustainability question is something we often dance around, or we even sometimes think that the different actors in the healthcare system don't think about sustainability in the same way. This needs to be sustainable for everyone. First and foremost, it needs to be sustainable for the citizens of the European Union. As I said before, I think in general, we have great healthcare systems. They're not perfect, but they're really good. And we need to make sure that that is sustainable so that there is good quality healthcare available to everybody in the European Union, irrespective of their economic situation or circumstances. We need also to make sure that the continuing investment in innovation, in research and development is sustainable. But I do think we can achieve both of those things. I don't think that there has to be a conflict between that. And at Roche, we have set ourselves the ambition of bringing way more innovation to more patients and to do it at a lower cost to society. Mm-hmm. Quite often when we start talking about that, then people will say, well, if you reduce your prices, it would be more sustainable for society. And there is certainly a question and a discussion to be had about how innovation is valued. No doubt about it. But it's not the only thing. We got to think about waste in the system. We got to think about how do you organize the system so that the right intervention takes place for the right person at the right time. So often people suffer unnecessarily because they get diagnosed late, or the medical intervention that they get comes a long period after it really should have. Not because anybody's not doing their job properly, but because the system isn't set up to help it. And so then I always come back to the question of data. How does data flow through the system, and how can we use it best for research on the one hand, yes, for running the healthcare systems also in the most efficient way possible, yes, and also to make sure that patients are getting the treatment that they need and the follow-up that they need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are let's say plentiful of dimension, I think, here that you just that you just addressed. I just would like to come back to the need to recreate or let's say rebuild the consensus with the key actors in the healthcare system in order to achieve this level of sustainability. You mentioned a few elements, as I said. What would be, according to you, I would say the number one KPI that we should use in order to let's say reforge this collaboration or this consensus between the key actors?
I'm not sure that I can identify a KPI per se, but I do think a great starting point would be a dialogue, getting all of the different stakeholders who have been working together now so well for the past year or 18 months around the table and having a discussion about what is it actually that we're trying to achieve. And there I'm talking about having patient representatives, absolutely. I'm talking about having industry, the research-based industry, whether that be pharma or for diagnostics or medical devices or whoever. I think we need medical professionals and we need healthcare policy people all around the table. And both as Roche and the FP of the European Industry Association, the Pharma Industry Association, we've been calling for a high-level forum in order to start that dialogue, to get together and agree that, in fact, many of the objectives that we have are expressed in different language, but essentially mean the same thing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that would be a great starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds, I mean, at the same time, very ambitious, but very fascinating and holding a lot of promises for, let's say, this future dialogue. What has been the response so far from, let's say, policymakers and authorities to the mere idea of that? And I'm asking this question in the context of, okay, a lot of policy developments that are ongoing, and I'm thinking in particular of the pharma strategy, which at the say has really, let's say, blown the good and the bad also towards the sector. So I'd like just to hear your views on that, and then I'd like to come back on the issue of data.
Sure. I think the initial reaction has been relatively positive. It's always hard to organize, and particularly now when the systems are still in a state of emergency. But the initial feedback we're getting, it seems to be relatively positive. I hear that in the ongoing Portuguese presidency of the European Union, they have taken this up, and actually they have, I believe, even this week. They're running some kind of forum on that topic. The subsequent, the upcoming presidencies also seem to be interested in taking this forward. And then, as always, there will be a bit of work required to actually make it happen. But I think all of us have learned from the experience over the last year and realized that dialogue and sitting around the table and trying to understand each other's motivations and aligning on some things is useful. And I think the echoes there are pretty positive, at least so far. I also think, I'm really encouraged by what I see from President von der Leyen's address, the State of the Union address recently, and the Commission's thinking and plans for the future, ensuring that healthcare is on the agenda both from the point of view of ensuring that we have sustainable and high quality and even better healthcare systems than we have today, and making sure that we have, from an industrial policy point of view, an important footprint in Europe. And I started working in this industry, I guess, about 25 years ago. And at that point in time, the degree of, let's say, importance or investment in research and development in the US, Japan, and in Europe was about the same. It's not the same anymore. And the US has grown significantly. China has appeared and is growing significantly. The ecosystems that are there with private and public partners all working together, financing continued research, is somehow seems more dynamic than Europe is now. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a question of competition either. I don't think we have to compete with China or compete with the US. I think there are some real natural advantages that Europe has, and that if we were to work on them, we could create a really dynamic research base, increase the amount of R&D getting done in Europe, without necessarily taking it away from China or the US. We have 36 billion R&D investment in Europe, mostly by the pharmaceutical industry at the moment. But it gets translated into fewer medical devices, fewer medicines than is the case in the US and in China. And I think we need to figure out why that is, mm-hmm. and see if there's something we can do about it.
Yeah, and in your view, on that question particularly, is it only an issue of investment, or would there be other, let's say, factors coming into consideration as to why Europe comparatively is now falling behind?
My own view is that there are two things that are causing us to fall behind. On a qualitative level, it's very hard to measure, but I get the sense that the healthcare sector's total healthcare sector in the US or in China is more dynamic. It's sort of, if you're working in those areas, it's somehow cooler to be in the US than it is to be in Europe. It has that sense of, mm-hmm. things can be done. I think in Europe, there are some practical things about financing for sure, but also I think just the idea, again, that mindset that we have that health is a cost as opposed to being an investment is preventing us from turning the great ideas that come out of Europe into practical applications at the same rate that happens in the US. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have, 16 out of the top 50 life science universities are in Europe. And, but when you look at the number of patents that are submitted and other indicators of the dynamic translation of that into application, there's much less in Europe. So that's one. And then the second, again, comes back to what we were talking about before. It's the flow of data. If you're in China or you're in the US, you have these huge data pools to be able to use and to work with. In Europe, we have a much more fragmented set of data pools. And I guess if you're in a European country and you're not involved in this topic, you might be thinking to yourself, well, a country of whatever number of million people, I mean, that's millions of people. It should be enough. And it can be for some things, but it's not for others. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we at Roche are very much in favor of is supporting the creation of a European health data space, to be able to pool data together with all of the protections of how those data are used and the privacy concerns for people who are in the system. With all of that, still pooling the systems together would create some advantages and a better series of outcomes for patients, for sure, because you just by putting more data together, you can analyze it at a scale that's not possible when it's smaller. Better for healthcare systems too, for learning, and certainly better for research and translating that into developments of medicines and medical devices and other things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's clearly one of the key points or key challenges, where also we identified that the amount of health data is just enormous. But we very often say that a wide majority or wide proportion of this amount of data can hardly be exploited because it's either badly collected or not standardized, or it's basically crap. So how can we address this notion of crap in, crap out, if we start considering the need for data mining in that respect? And I mean, the creation of the EU health data space is clearly one of the big challenges ahead of us, and we are looking forward to seeing a brain cluster being potentially created in this context, because we do realize that this is potentially one of the, let's say, missing points that can help advance research in the brain space. So, quality of the data. Any points on that specifically?
I think anytime I come across a data system that has been set up, whether that be in a country or in a hospital or in a hospital department, it always works really well. Mm-hmm. So the data systems are set up to do something, and generally in the European systems in particular, they do that pretty well. Where we begin to have problems is that the systems are designed in different ways, the data are collected in different ways, and there isn't any way of pooling it, at least not any easy way of pooling it. So that's where things begin to break down. Even within healthcare systems, I often speak with people in systems around Europe and elsewhere, but particularly in Europe, and they bemoan the fact that it can be hard to get to data that they need. Sometimes because, and we all do this as well, probably in our private lives and in our companies and in our organization, we still think of ourselves as being owners of data or data systems. And allowing others to access those data systems somehow or other might not be a good thing. I think we need to make sure that we understand for what the reasons for which data will be used and how it's used, and we make sure that the sources of the data, the people who provide it, are well protected. But we need to change our mindset into thinking about how can we make the most out of the data that we collect, and how what can I use it for, rather than owning the system. Mm-hmm. Individual patients definitely, if they're in the system, need to be the owners of their own data. There's no doubt about this. But we should make sure that we make it easier for those data to be anonymized or pseudonymized and then pooled and used. Yeah. And so I think there's a bit about data science, and there's a bit about mindset that we need to address, and
potentially a bit also about culture. And the way we look at data and privacy in Europe is probably not clearly the same as the way China is handling it, where, as you say, if it is decided everybody needs to share the data, that means 1.3 billion people are going to feed into a joint system. On the issue of culture, I mean, is that something where you see that we still have work to be done in terms of how we communicate about that? We communicate about the importance of here sharing data, but also the need for, let's say, a stronger role or stronger recognition of science, or stronger recognition of evidence. How to push that in, let's say, at a societal level.
I don't know if it's about culture, but I'm pretty sure it's something to do with communication. I think we have to demystify some stuff. We have to explain and be really transparent about why it's good to share data, how the identity of the people who are providing that data is protected and how their data is projected and what it's used for. So I think there is a discussion to be had about that. We see it in all sorts of sectors. People are very open to sharing data about themselves when they're comfortable and confident that it will be used for the right reason. You have it in clinical trials. People volunteer, happily, people volunteer to take part in clinical trials. And they know that by taking part in clinical trials, they are hopefully contributing to help a better outcome for themselves. But also, from a societal basis, they're helping to advance science and contribute to the building of scientific knowledge and therefore outcomes for other people either now or later. And they do it in the knowledge that their information and their data will be well protected and well taken care of. And generally that is true. I mean, we are obsessive about this at Roche, that we take care of that data. It has been entrusted to us, and we think and act every day in ways that hopefully justify that trust. So that's in the context of a clinical trial. You could extend that beyond that into the population, but people need to know what they're signing up for, and understand what will be and what will not be done with the data. And that is a communications effort, probably over a long period of time.
Thank you. I just would like to come to the point of fragmentation of our healthcare systems. At our January event of the Brain Innovation Days, one of our panelists, being the founder of a startup, mentioned, and we were asking about the comparison between Europe and the US. And I think he said something like, if I would have been in the US, clearly I could have established my startup or developed it way faster. But with, let's say, the more diverse and complex environments in Europe, it took me longer to build it up and to develop, let's say, the concept and bring solutions to the market. But I find that thanks to this external somehow difficulties, we are far more resilient, and we can be seen as being more robust. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I would say that he's a philosopher in saying that, but I don't know if you would have a reaction to what he says.
Yeah, I don't know about the resilience, but if he says that's true, then I would tend to believe it. I think there's a few things in here, Fred. The first is we have all of these dynamic people who have, either data or scientific skills that they want to turn into applications, devices, or medicines that are useful for society. In Europe, there are many, many of them. The first thing we have to all agree on as a European society is whether it's okay for those people to do that and to earn money from it. In other words, is it okay that when you start up your company, that company becomes profitable? And that's a debate we've been skirting around a bit in Europe. And I think we need to put it on the table and be open about it and decide, is this okay or is it not okay? And it's clearly not quite as black and white as that, because you could say it might be okay up to a certain level or whatever, but we at least need to have the discussion. In China or in the US, that discussion doesn't really happen. You can turn this into a business and that's fine. That's regarded as being a good thing. I'm not sure that we necessarily always see it like that in Europe. The consequence of that then is, first of all, it feels uncomfortable. And secondly, it's hard to get access to finance. So that's one area where there's an obvious pull then, particularly from the US, where you would say, I've been through the European education systems, I've learned all of this, I have acquired skills, I have ideas now, and now I'm going to move to the US and I'm going to apply it. And I think that's good. It's great that people go there because it helps for diversity of thinking, but it would also be good that someone either come back or stay. So that's the first thing I think we have to do. Then the second is, okay, then having done that, how easy, supposing it is, so you can set up your businesses and it's okay and we all like that and we think this is good because it contributes to Europe in many different ways. Patients are getting great outcomes, and our industrial and employment base grows, and that's a good thing. Then the next thing is, how do we facilitate that happening? It is very fragmented at the moment, so it's really hard to get anything done. Sometimes even within countries, never mind across the countries of the European Union. So it's hard. And I think there are things that we could do to simplify that, to make it easier. I like the idea of resilience, but I think we can become resilient without making it difficult for people. So we could simplify. And then that comes back to, okay, so then how do we create a flow of data with all of the protections that are in there that we keep talking about, but which facilitates the development of things in Europe a little easier? Mm-hmm. And then when we think about whether or not we want to include them in the healthcare systems in the country, do we necessarily have to have a different way of thinking about that in every single country? Or is there something that we could do to say, just like we do from a regulatory point of view with the European Medicines Agency, is there something we can do to say, actually, here's a common core set of things that you need to be able to show that are the same for all of the European Union countries, and that then would give the basis for discussions about whether this should be financed and reimbursed in each individual country. There's still things that are probably need to be local because the healthcare systems are slightly different, but there are many things that I think we could make common, and that would help.
All right. I'd like to probably move on to maybe more have a focus on the neuroscience field. And a question that I wanted to ask you is that over the last years, there was a lot of concern about, let's say, the industry, let's say, commitment or potentially, let's say, lack of commitment to brain research because of it being inherently risky. But in spite a huge unmet medical need. How do you see this evolving? And would you have, let's say, good news for now and potentially the future?
Well, like I said right at the beginning, I'm an optimist by nature. So I think any advances that we see represent good news. I mean, you refer to neuroscience as being risky. It is risky because it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to come up with medicines that really advance the outcomes for patients, make things better for patients. It's hard for all the reasons which you know even way better than I do. Hard at a basic biological level, hard also to measure then the outcomes, and harder still to measure the outcomes in a way that's meaningful and important to patients. That being said, I think these things progress in cycles. I'm really proud of the fact that we never went away from neuroscience in Roche, even though for quite a period of time none of the work that was being done translated into a really meaningful medicine. But that's what we do. You make the investments in things because you believe that you can make a difference. In an ideal world, they turn into a medicine that's a significant improvement on what's there. If that doesn't happen, at least we advance the science and understanding. We've had more of the advancing of understanding than great medicines for a period. But in the last few years, we're beginning to see some of the results of that persistence. We saw it again from Roche in multiple sclerosis a few years ago. Spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, just a month ago, not even a month ago, we had great news of the approval of one of our medicines in Europe. And we have over a dozen medicines in development. There's more than 75 clinical trials ongoing. And hopefully some of those will turn into, as I said before, meaningful advances.
Well, I think it's about time to conclude today's discussion. But before I do so, I wanted to give you maybe the opportunity to say a last word or concluding word on the discussion we just had.
I would just say to anybody who's listening and who's interested in all of this, our intent is to try and bring way more innovation that's meaningful to people, to society, and to make healthcare systems more sustainable by reducing costs to society. And our invitation is that for anybody, I mean, you can question our motives or you can criticize us from time to time, and that's probably fair. But I hope that people will treat our intent as being a good one. And I would say we're always open for dialogue. We're always open for sharing ideas and for discussion, whether that be on the science or the biology in a particular disease, or discussions about how we can contribute to making healthcare systems better and outcomes for the patients who are in those systems better than they are now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Padraic. And I would say that EBC is fully committed to advancing this dialogue and discussion and making sure that we create the right platform for everybody to feel comfortable having this type of discussion. So all reference to the various issues that we mentioned, but also potential resources. And I know that you also have a blog where you are sharing these ideas. So we'll invite people also to visit that and to possibly comment. But thank you again for providing your insights today and on how to sustain health innovation, but also how to ensure that Europe stays on the map in this sector at the global level. So for further information, please do visit the Brain Innovation Days website at braininnovationdays.eu, where we host not only podcasts, but also all publications and material mentioned. So thank you again, Padraic, for joining us today. Thank you to all listeners for connecting, and please stay tuned for more Brain Talks. Thank you and goodbye.